Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a session of Toward a Quality of Life here at BNN TV in the month of August, on a day that is more or less typical of what we might think an August day should feel like. And we are in the midst of a period here and around our nation and in nations around the world of times when the weather conditions are not at all like what we might think is a normal standard. In our case, right here in the Boston area and the East Coast area, we've had very many days of rain, grayness, and prior to this we've had record lows on an average for, I believe it was the whole month of July, where temperatures did not reach the normal higher ranges of what might be expected according to recent history. And we also had a very unusual spring that really wasn't spring, that continued to be winter. We never have quite had summer, and we had one hell of a winter when it really was technically winter. Sometimes when I speak with people and I have to ask them the question of what season it is in some of the work I do as a psychologist, people who are perfectly rational may stop and think and say, oh, for example, summer, but it sure doesn't feel like it. It's almost like you don't know what you should say a season is for much of the time. So the weather is very irregular. And it should be very apparent to us, without being scientists, without being particularly knowledgeable about any such matters in a scientific sense, that things are very much amiss with the environment and getting more and more amiss in the number of events, the extremes of events, and the durations of events that don't fit the pattern of what we know as recent history for recorded human life regarding weather patterns. And the thing about the weather that we've been having here in the Boston area and in the eastern, northeastern area is that with all the days of recent rain, day upon day upon day, when the rain does happen, it often comes on without warning, as though someone just turned on a faucet, and it can be raining rather hard, rather briskly, and then all of a sudden it will stop. It will just shut itself off. It will turn on, it will turn off. It will sort of give you a little sprinkle here and there. It may even sometimes have the sun shining, and suddenly, boom, the rain will start. And of course, a lot of grayness. And a lot of people are very disturbed by the grayness. Our mood is very dependent on having normal rhythm patterns of lots of sunshine interspersed with some rain, but not gray days and lots of rain and what people deem is not summer-like weather for this period of time. And people's moods can be very affected by it. Myself personally, unfortunately, having watched the environment deteriorate over the past 15 to 20 years, it's an unfortunate and very sad proposition that every year things just get incrementally worse, and there's no doubt that unfortunately there will be more irregularities and more extremities and more events that don't fit the pattern of what we wish they would be, or what we might expect by history, or what we might expect should be the case. So it's very serious, and the environment should by all means be our priority.
President Donald J. Trump took the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord agreement in 2017. He did this because other economic powerhouses, such as China and India, would have been able to spew much more carbon into the atmosphere than the United States into the future, which would be an unfair competitive advantage for other countries and a great economic disadvantage for the United States. In early 2017, the United States economy was already suffering from 8 years of the previous president's policies. The Paris Climate Accord agreement also required the United States to pay a lot of money to a fund and carry a much greater financial burden than others in this to help other countries get on their feet and develop more green, so to speak, economies. For all the disadvantages to the United States, the Paris Climate Accord agreement would reduce temperature escalation by a minuscule amount. President Trump also believes that new technologies for fossil fuels, such as coal, are environmentally responsible, and so-called green energies are in the economy's energy mix already as well.
Though for years now I've been brought down by the idea and knowledge that so much of the environment is going to hell in a handbasket, and the signs and actual evidences are as clear as day. The handwriting is on the wall, and all we need do is look before our very eyes. We don't need to be scientific. We don't need to go to the Arctic Pole and measure the ozone layer. We don't need to take fancy readings with fancy instruments, and we don't have to be meteorologists in control rooms reporting on the weather and saying, oh my goodness, another very hot day, but we'll be over this soon. Or, oh my goodness, I know you've seen rain for 10 days now, but guess what? You'll have to stick it out for a couple of days more. Instead of saying, oh my goodness, we are in such trouble. And as all this extraordinary weather happens, ours, as I've explained it, but some of the heat also this summer, which has been highly, highly exaggerated, especially abroad. As it happens, it gets reported. This is what is so pathetic. It gets reported, and it gets told to us as to how serious and problematic it seems to be for people to cope with, and all the inadequacies, insufficiencies, and inconveniences that are attendant to this problem weather, but never is a word whispered of how problematic and seriously in danger and grave a circumstance our environmental condition is. That's something you don't hear alongside the many incessant news reports about how inconvenient and too bad and oh yes, another extreme day today. This is very ignorant, this is very short-sighted, and we have only ourselves to blame for it. One does not need to be very sophisticated in the ways of the world to see that things are terribly amiss, and to know that a lot of the industrial and technological components of what goes into the environment today don't work well with the natural environment, and therefore, of course, 1 and 1 is 2, and there are problems. Some of the problems that should seem so exaggerated to people's minds, and it's a wonder that environmentalists are still called kooks, that environmentalists are still called extremists, because these problems have been going on for so many years now, and as I said, they get longer, they get nastier, they get more intense, they get more frequent. It's a wonder that people dare to challenge, that people say we don't need to put the environment in the forefront of what needs to happen. Of all the causes that we could ever want, terrorism included, the most urgent cause for we as people is that of the environment. And the most urgent cause for we as people is to do something about nuclear radiation. And the most vital thing for we as people is to do something about the emissions into the environment, including those that are radioactive in nature, including spills that happen deep in the ocean, including spills that happen from satellites, including natural emissions, relatively small though they be, from nuclear power plants and from mishaps and from other technologies, including all these products and productions that are working their way into the environment on a constant basis of every minute and every second. the environment is very urgent, and it's a wonder that people aren't attending to it, and it's a wonder that it's not a main national agenda. And it's also a small wonder that around the world, many people find the United States to be unusually and surprisingly recalcitrant in this regard, to not make the environment a #1 priority. Looking at some of the most terrible situations that happened recently, and anytime we're talking, we can look at some of the most terrible situations because they come with unending alacrity. Every season, every period, every corner of the world brings its own demises, devastations, and catastrophes. Just recently, in the state of North Dakota, I believe sometime in the month of June, we had hail that was measured at 17 3/4 inch in diameter that left craters and tornadoes that left craters when they passed through the state of North Dakota. 17 3/4 inch hail, I think that's a bit extreme and a time to take notice. In fact, hail is appearing in circumstances that it normally wouldn't appear in, except once in a great while. Hail is happening in times when you wouldn't think that there should be hail, such as in summer months and in summer climates, warmer climates, and suddenly it will start hailing. In August, this very August of this year, there was a period in early August when every night, and every day for that matter, had a smogginess to it. We easily forget, because as the weather changes and as we move on, we just think of the next day. We don't look back and we don't quite remember all these dismal events. But there were several days period when the air was heavy and it looked like it was fog, but what it actually was smog-laden dirt hanging in the air around in this Massachusetts area in the early month of August. The air is so dirty, and yet we are told that by EPA standards we have some of the cleanest air in 20 years. If we have some of the cleanest air, then why are the children getting asthma at increasing rates? Why are people getting respiratory diseases even without smoking at increasing rates? And why everywhere you go you can smell something that isn't right for your body to have to ingest? And you can see things in the air. Why, when you travel on the highway, can you see such dirt and filth in the air? Just recently, I read that there was an area somewhere, I believe, on the East Coast. Of course, it would be the East Coast because I believe it was in the Atlantic Ocean. There was a very frigid band of water at the shores. I believe maybe this was happening in the New Jersey area, and people were amazed, and scientists came to see it, and people could not believe how frigidly cold the Atlantic Ocean was. And one of the theories, everybody is looking for theories instead of looking right before their very eyes and understanding that we are in deep trouble. Takes no articulation, takes no words, takes no special knowledge, but people were very surprised that the temperature could be that cold, and it was another one of those many things you so often hear, never before have we seen this happen during this time of year. One of the theories that was proposed was that this water may be coming from glacier melts. In fact, I heard today that the glaciers have melted, I believe it was 7% or so in the last 25 years, and the pace of that is going to speed up, and there's going to be quite a bit of melting if it continues at the rate it is going. It is going at a certain rate, and so the trend is being projected, and that by the end of this century the glaciers will be pretty much all melted. Another one of those Ripley's Believe It or Not are amazing things that people have never seen, and scientists come to look at it and investigate it, was some kind of a blob of algae. And as far as those that were speaking about it said they had never seen anything like this. I believe this was also somewhere in the area of New Jersey, appeared in the water. Some kind of very bad smelling, very big blobby thing that many people had to come and try to understand what on earth could this be. And I guess the last opinion was that it was a collection of dead algae, the likes of which, the greatness of which, and the smell of which, and the looks of which had never been seen before. Another one of those, what on earth is this? Or why is the weather behaving this way? Or why is the Atlantic Ocean this cold? Or, oh my God, look at the size of this hail, that things are freezing and congealing in the very upper atmospheres to humongous sizes out of the normal range, and also potentially dangerous. And we remember how the tornadoes came through the Midwestern states for a period of several days. I believe 380 or so, somewhere in that vicinity. Don't quote me on that. And it was said, we never had this many tornadoes in that short a period of time. What's going on here? What's going on? The scientists ask, what's going on? The meteorologists don't ask. They just say, hey, bear with it. You'll see sunshine in 5 days. Go through another few days of the cold. We'll get sun on the 3rd day. What a way to live with weather. Sunshine is our birthright. Rain is a beautiful thing. Rain and darkness for many people, even myself, in certain sorts of conditions, can make one feel down, can make one feel blue. Rain in proper proportion is fine. But sunshine is our birthright, and normal temperatures are our birthright. And of course, all those places that already live on the extremes, such as Phoenix, Las Vegas, and more importantly, the Indian continent and the African continent, get whacked superlatively hard when the extremes move beyond almost what is doable in a natural environment. And if we can't do it for ourselves, let us at least do it for nature. Let us at least be wiser and smarter and more aware for animals and for life that lives that isn't human, because the human is going headstrong against what is our sustenance and, truthfully, what is in our soul and in our psychic necessity to have for life, love, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yes, the environment should be our #1 agenda in this country and in countries all over the world. It is just positively urgent. And as I'm speaking to you tonight, I believe there's been a blackout at the period that I'm speaking to you on this very day in several states. Now, one of the conditions, if it were due to an overload, which is what I had heard being said on the news, if it were due to an overload, then we have to think of how we cannot maintain and sustain, rather than trying to build more powerful grids, we cannot maintain and sustain a lot of air conditioning, a lot of people sucking on energy. In itself, the toxins from that and other toxins from our industrial and commercial way of life, leaving more pollutants in the air and causing, through a series of chain events, causing temperatures to be extreme, both in heat and cold, but when, in this case, when they're extreme on the heat side of things, actually making them hotter. By virtue of putting more things into the air, needing to cool that air, and what happens with everything that goes into the air, causing events such that temperatures don't come to us because we don't have the proper protections from above, and temperatures get higher as well as get lower. For many complicated reasons, none of which is working in a direct line in either direction, but rather causing a lot of extremes and severities that we have to suffer. So we have to think of how all the people, I guess New York City was hit, Think of how all the people are using all that air conditioning right here in Boston tonight. Everybody using air conditioning. Many places don't have proper ventilation to boot, where we could just be using the natural air, which is what we should use. We can't be having high rises and also with glass on the outsides where the heat penetrates and heats up even further a building that shouldn't be that high in the first place, and should have proper ventilation just by more natural air circulating without having to use electricity, without having to use power. So think of all the ways that you just can't keep sustaining. It's coming to slap us in the face. We ought to be smart enough to know that the environment is our #1 agenda, and that conservation of energy and thinking of ways to use less energy, literally, not just by having lower gas mileage cars, or lower electric using appliances, but by not having to use the electricity at all. Ways of engineering our lives and our lifestyles that we're more in tune with the natural environment, if indeed it's not too late. Also, one of those never seen before happened. I mean, how many never seen befores do I bring to you? Can I bring to you? Too many for me to remember. Too many things going by to even remember. If something seems funnily amiss, and if something seems quite not right and you can't put your finger on it, think of the environment for one. But another one of these shocking events, just becoming shocking events about which theories have to be conjured, was the recent discovery of 7 whales dead together off the shores of Cape Cod. The scientists said, oh, it's so unusual to see 7 whales all together dead. That's very unusual. Another unusual, and you know, before we had brought you a show about the Navy's use of LFA sonar, which actually blows the brains by virtue of vibration of mammals and other sea creatures in the water, and also even if coming from a very great distance, because the sonar they use under the sea travels very far, actually also, if not blowing them, actually hemorrhaging right into their brains, if not doing that, causing the sea creatures, and in particular whales, for example, to disorient and not be able to find what they have to do, their food and so on, by virtue of not having the capacity of audition, which is what they rely on for these functions. So pathetic. The things that are pathetic and venal and sinful abound. Every one of them a mirror of an environment that is in such abysmal difficulty. You saw recently Miami had lots of flooding, lots of wet weather, unusual amounts, and a couple of funnel cloud formations that are tornadoes that touch down. Not that they don't ever, but with more frequency, tornado-like funnels dropping down into segments of Miami, and you know that one tornado wiped out a whole area of Palm Beach, and I heard a lady speaking about the homes that were hit in that area, and she said that they were brought to splinters. The homes were blown apart into splinters by the force of the event. We remember a while ago, this year, not too long ago, Fort Lauderdale, there was 10.22 inches of rain in a 2-hour period. Manhole covers for gasoline at gas stations were floating in the water, even though they're so very heavy and shut tight, just by virtue of how much water came about in a 2-hour period in Fort Lauderdale. So this is some of just on the East Coast. We know that Phoenix and California and Nevada have been going through extremes. New Mexico, extremes for their already sort of extreme standards. Another thing, too, environmentally is, of course, there's the West Nile virus scare. And where the mosquitoes are, where the virus is being found, a lot of people are going into heavy spraying campaigns with toxins that are neuroagents that will be so bad for fish, for birds, for worms, for bugs that we need, the kind of bugs that we do need, and for crippling our own neurology, us as humans, becoming more Parkinsonian, becoming more crippled, more debilitated with various diseases from all the toxins being put in to our environment. And while I'm speaking of toxins, I'm just going to stoop down here and reach for one of the biggest and very common toxins. I'd like you to see, I hope you can see, this product, Roundup. Let's see, who is the company that makes this product? It sells by the bundle. I don't see here who makes Roundup. Monsanto, wouldn't you know it? Monsanto and Dow, two major chemical companies, genetic engineering companies. Roundup. Let's see if we have, what is the, let's see, ingredient. How it works. I don't see anything here about the ingredient. I don't see anything about the ingredient.
The primary ingredient in Roundup is glyphosate. It is pure poison to living matter. In spite of evidence of its carcinogenicity, Roundup continues to be manufactured and used. A recent study gave it absolution from causing human illness, but follow the money and conflicts of interest on so-called studies claiming to be science. Point blank, it is unwise to unskeptically trust studies labeled as science today because commercial interest is too influential for truth to be gotten or renounced.
Roundup enters plants through foliage and moves systemically to the roots, killing weeds and everything else by stopping the production of a substance found in plants. Any product not absorbed by plants breaks down into natural materials without moving in or to the soil of untreated parts. This weed and grass killer, keep out of reach of children, precaution, hazardous to humans and domestic animals, causes eye irritation, avoid contact with eyes or clothing, wash thoroughly with soap and water after handling. Important, do not spray plants or grasses you like, they may die too. And guess what? You may die too. Not directly from one. How would you like to spray some of this into your mouth? Environmental hazards. Do not apply directly to water. Do not contaminate water when disposing of equipment. Wash waters. And listen to this. Notice, buyer assumes all responsibility for safety and use, not in accordance with the directions. So if you happen to let this spill, or if a child gets near it, or if you happen to kill some of your favorite plants, Roundup, ladies and gentlemen, when you go into a store such as Home Depot or any place that sells this kind, Kmart sells this kind of a product, you will see boxes and boxes, and it comes in very big containers, Roundup. Recently, I know someone that used this on their dandelions on the lawn because they didn't want the lawn to have dandelions. So they followed the directions and sprayed it just on the dandelion. And everywhere they sprayed a dandelion, their whole lawn got dead and they had all these brown dirt spots left after the Roundup worked, and they had to go around replanting the grass into those bare spots. Think of all the plants across the USA and across the world and just nature that's getting sprayed with this toxic that is very harmful to humans, that cannot be swallowed even a tiny bit, that cannot be put in one's eyes, that shouldn't be put on one's skin, that shouldn't be inhaled, going into the ground and seeping into the water system ultimately, all together with all the gallons and cartons that are sold every day across the United States. This is just one of so many chemicals constantly infiltrating the environment to our detriment. Now, in finale of this environmental examples, of which there are so many, I'm going to read to you some of the things. Some very difficult damage has happened to France in the last couple of weeks or so with an extraordinary heat wave, the likes of which they have never experienced. France has had great difficulty, as have had so many countries in Europe. England has suffered severely, things they're not used to, temperatures rising way above, and I don't have to tell you this because it's been in the news so much. Eastern Europe was also hit very hard, some of the countries more east in Europe, and some of the shipping lanes, the rivers, actually had to stop shipping because the water had become so low from the heat and the drought as well as heat conditions. So I'll read to you some of the pathetic events that happened in France. This was reported on August 11th of this year. It says, France called, from Reuters, France called emergency talks on Monday on overheating at nuclear power plants as Europe's heat wave entered its second week, with officials torn between output cuts and allowing hotter water to pour into rivers. Now this, if we have any common sense, if we have any heart, if we have any feeling for life, if we have any existential sense of solidarity with being alive, has to pull at our heartstrings, has to tear our guts apart, that a decision would have to be made whether to allow hot water that is recirculating around nuclear power plants to go back into the rivers and wreak havoc there, kill fish, kill plant life in the rivers, bring up temperatures by even minor amounts of degrees, cause great environmental degradation. The waterways are very sensitive to minor temperature changes. Or allow people to have more electricity use. Which brings us to this whole chain events thing, the nuclear power thing I alluded to earlier, that there shouldn't be nuclear power to begin with. There's no way to contain the waste, and we don't have to study how to do it. The waste never goes away. Why should we be putting it anywhere? Why should anywhere in the earth have to have radioactive waste that stays radioactive for so many years for the future to come? Why should any place in this whole beautiful world, be it a salt mine or the outer space or the depths of the ocean or the innards of a mountain, why should any place be sacrileged with with radioactive waste? What a sacrilege. To say the least of the radioactive emissions, the radioactive haphazards, the radioactive accidents. This should be a number one concern for us to get away from nuclear power, as well as to get away from so much energy use, period. So what a pitiful and sad thing to see that officials are torn between cutting electricity to people and allowing hotter water to pour into rivers. And that's when nuclear power plants are cooled, they require great amounts of water that circulate around, and they're often found on, plants are found near waterbeds, and that water goes around, gets heated, but then passes back into the waterways that the water is taken from. We have one up here that might still be operating that way. Maybe Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant operates that way, and the one in New Hampshire, I don't know if that one's been closed, was operating on the edge of the ocean, I believe, using the water to recirculate and cool the reactor. After Paris sweltered through its hottest night since records began. Another since records began. Another since never saw this before. Never saw 7 whales dead together. Saw 7 whales stranded. Saw 17 whales stranded. Saw many, many whales stranded, saying, why are these whales being stranded? They're not particularly sick. What is going on here? I wonder. We've got to think up some theories for this one. We've got to go all around, stumble and trip and so on, but don't pick up the banana peel. After Paris sweltered through its hottest night since records began, a doctor in the city said more elderly people were dying from the heat and accused health authorities of doing little about the crisis. Temperatures have hit around 104 Fahrenheit in the past few days, spelling trouble for France's nuclear reactors, many of which are cooled by river water. The plants pour water back into the rivers, but only once it has been cooled to a certain temperature to protect the environment. And now they cannot give enough electricity to people. They can't use the electricity to cool the water, so should they just let the water go back into the rivers hot or hotter? Hot, actually. I don't know how much they would cool it off. With river levels falling and the mercury rising, authorities face the choice of spewing out hotter water, risking ecological damage. Aren't we famous for risking ecological damage, or cutting output, potentially leading to blackouts? About 80% of France's electricity needs are met by 19 nuclear power stations and 58 reactors. France is often held as a model of nuclear power for energy. The heat wave has also sparked fires in many parts of Europe and claimed dozens of lives. As a matter of fact, today, I heard the figure that 3,000 people had died from the heat in France. We've never seen people arriving sick in cartloads like this, frequently with fevers of 107 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Newspapers reported a leap in death rates at care homes for the elderly, with funeral parlors saying they had no more room to take bodies into storage. With temperatures of 77.9 degrees Fahrenheit, Paris had its warmest night Sunday since records began 130 years ago, the Météo France weather agency said. Now here is something else that could just make you fold over and fall in despair. Carpets of leaves from trees withering in the heat gave the streets of Paris and other towns an autumn-like appearance. These are the things that tug at one's heart, that tug at one's soul, and that send fireworks through our brains, saying, we are doing things terribly wrong, and why do we keep destroying as we do? We must reverse course. We must use less energy. We must give up the idea of nuclear power. We must rely, as people always say, on new forms of power, but not so much that as try to run our lives with less electricity used to begin with, mainly in the kinds of buildings we have, the kinds of cars we drive, the kinds of clothes we wear, the kinds of structure and lifestyle conditions we make for ourselves. Just that alone, irrespective of energy, can go a great, great distance towards cutting our energy in half, our energy use in half or better. We have to reverse trying to kill dandelions with very severe poisons, such as the Roundup that I pointed out to you. There are so many natural ways to garden. There are so many natural ways to prevent bugs. And we certainly should be sensible enough to take advantage of these. When all is said and done, after we've been everywhere, done everything, tried to reach the far distances in outer space, the depths of the sea, what we'll really come back to is just the beauty and glory of nature, of trees, of the outdoors, of the woods, of birds singing, of bees doing their thing on flowers. That's what makes humans really tick. Robots don't make humans tick. Video games don't make humans tick. Fast cars don't really make humans tick. In the end, we return to nature. And in the beginning, we come from nature. And that's what really gives us our stamina, and in practical terms is responsible for us being alive. And if we don't want a significant amount of the kind of depressed mood that is pervading the culture to keep growing, we should just do an about-face and start to respect the very life that is our foundation, the very life that is really us, the very nature that we should not be working against, the nature that we should be in synchrony with, the nature that we should be humbled by, the nature that we should be integrated with and adore and revere. And if you're religious, you can find so many more ways of thinking about and feeling about the importance and grandiosity of nature and the environment. And how dare we take it for granted and cut down trees and uproot trees and change things around to our liking, destroy forests, build any kinds of structures we want, use up all the wood, not have foliage, not have protection from the sunshine by trees all over in a natural sort of way, just expose ourselves to blistering heat, cause gases to rise and emit into the environment constantly, breathe the foul air, have our children be getting sicker. It's pretty bold stuff. And it certainly is testament to the fact that human beings are not at all what they're cracked up to be. In fact, they're not the very intelligent and not as noble the creatures that we might wish. I think a lot of that kind of rhetoric and belief system about human beings has been put to the test in the last century and is becoming increasingly noted as not that glorious a picture at all. A lot of things that humans took for granted and ennobled as traditional or as achieving great achievements are being put to the test and questioned and thought of with some skepticism and even cynicism in the times in which we're living. So, environment. And in the time remaining, I would like to just pose a couple of questions that we won't have time to answer, but hopefully that we would be thinking about as well. Besides the environment, which should be our priority, and besides the way we abuse animals, and we abuse animals when we ruin the environment. That is a very pathetic part of ruining the environment. Ruining places that animals can live. I know in many towns now, small animals and bigger ones, even as big as fox and coyote, are having to move closer and closer into land, and of course they get killed and eventually extinguished from an area. And the smaller ones actually living on properties of all these homes that are going up and destroying land all over the United States. And the animals are moving in closer and closer to where the humans live. Alligators are doing the same because they have no other place to go. And in the end, of course, they end up dying. They can't last. There was a time in Boston, several years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when certain kinds of animals could be seen in the nighttime, rarely, trying to make their way, skirting their way around the buildings in Boston. You don't see that anymore. It's just become so severe and so industrial and urbanized that even these misplaced fugitive animals can no longer skirt for whatever time is allotted them amongst these humans in their brick dwellings, can no longer make it even to that degree. But you could see sometimes possums, stranded and living and foraging at night, and you could see a raccoon now and then, and you certainly could see felines that were stray and lost. You don't see that anymore. They don't stand the chance. They don't lost. Everything is much too aggravated, much too urbanized, much too hostile an environment for critters to get by. But in the country, they're all being forced towards all these homes and developments going up and knocking down the woods everywhere. And they're living right on people's lands and burrowing into their yards and hurting the nice landscaping things that they're doing, and so forth and so on. And it's really pathetic. So animals really get the short shrift of the environment. They don't cause it, but they certainly get to be hurt by it, and they get hurt much more upfront and much more seriously to extinction than do humans. We are extinguishing also, but right now we're sitting in comfy chairs watching the news at night and just having lots of stress. But slowly but surely everything is catching up to us as well. But like I said before, the whales are losing their bearings, losing their ways to get food, downright having imploded brains from vibrations of LFA sonar, radioactive spills from nuclear submarines, trash galore in the ocean of every way, shape, and form. All those cruise lines always paying big fines for all the sewage and other kind of oils and gasoline that they're throwing into the ocean. Turtles have to walk along a certain way by the moon. They're guided. The signals that they get work by instinct and by taxis, not taxis that you take around the city, but like ways that the body is programmed to go towards. And their pathways are being obstructed. They're losing out. Frogs are being born from toxins without limbs, with gruesome heads or one eye or all kinds of deformities, and half the population of the world's frogs is gone, is the report. We could go on and on. The animals are getting it very bad, and of course the animals are getting it in the laboratory as well. And we want to always make a point to help get the animals out of the laboratory, to never fail to speak up for the desecration and degradation that animals are enduring as being tools for research as we speak. Monkeys, cats, dogs, rodents, going through unfathomable pain even just to be incarcerated and have at the mercy in a small cage of whatever a human would do. And some of what a human does is so Horrible, horrible is a mild word for what a research subject has to endure. So we can't ever forget to try to please help the animals in every way, shape, and form, and to know that products you use are tested on animals. Maybe this Roundup was tested on animals, just to see how toxic it is. I know there is a gas called Soman that is being tested on monkeys. It's a nerve gas. Oh, there's so many things being tested. And I have this information here of monkeys being used to receive doses of this nerve gas. And even though we don't know, and this research is being carried out by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and or with the sanction of the FDA. And this nerve gas brings death by causing loss of muscle control, paralysis of the muscles required for breathing. And the drug has been approved for combat use by United States military personnel. This is only in April 2003 that this Soman nerve gas has been approved for combat use by U.S. military personnel. And as far as the animals go, previous experiments with nerve gas have described how monkeys get violent convulsions following a medium dose of the gas, and then a few survive a higher dose sometimes, and these then made attempts to crawl about the cage but relapsed after about an hour and died. Other chemical agents include sarin, which you've heard a lot about, a highly lethal nerve gas, and monkeys are being used for experiments on this, and the experimentation is performed by the U.S. Department of Defense and by military and civilian facilities in many countries. Among the U.S. government labs using animals in warfare experimentation, there's the Army Medical Research Institute of Chemical Defense in Maryland, another institute in Maryland, the Walter Reed Medical Research Center in Washington, D.C., the Brooks Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas Center, and the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio are some of the labs using animals sanctioned by the U.S. FDA at times and by the U.S. Department of Defense and by military and civilian facilities in many countries. And the person who writes this article about the nerve gas being tested on monkeys ends with, animals don't drop bombs, animals don't make wars. Just because humans do, why should animals suffer? Amen. Amen. And speaking of war, speaking of gas, speaking of chemical agents, speaking of things that humans are doing that go against goodness and greatness and nobility, I'd like to at least put out the question, though we won't address it today, of regarding war, regarding military use of nerve gas, regarding military operations that are meant to kill people and hurt people. I'd like to ask if we should be dropping bombs on people at all, if we should be using nerve gas on people at all. Have we not lived through enough war? Have we not learned enough along the way to make ourselves blue in the face with getting together with people and talking things through and working things through with compromise and diplomacy? Should we ever be going for force and brutality as a first means of so-called defense? Not only defense, but preemption. Going out of our way and going out of our way to crush people, going out of our way when we have the military might to decimate anybody, anytime, any place, anywhere. That the means we have are so powerful and so hurtful that no one can withstand them. Should we be dropping bombs? And is it a Christian thing to do if one is a Christian? Or is it a Judaic thing to do? Or is it a Buddhist thing to do? Or is it a Muslim thing to do? To drop bombs and to use chemical agents. And just because somebody else does it, do we say, well, look, he did it, so we have to do it? Should it be our style, as I heard one military person describe, with the tanks that we now have that can crush anything and give great confidence to people in the military because nothing can stand in their way. So if you're in a tank, you can crush everything in your path. If you're in a United States tank, the kind of sophisticated technology we've made, is it right for us to be able to crush and to use these weapons, to use these armaments to crush and to subdue? Is it right to be burning people? Is it right to be using napalm, as it's reported now by the Department of Defense that we actually did in this ongoing conflict in the country of Iraq? And shouldn't we be most worried about making sure we understand people, making sure we honor people, making sure we defer to people, and know who they are, and try to learn who they are when we're dealing with them and when we're in places that are theirs and not ours? Shouldn't that be a philosophy we have, and shouldn't we really care about animals in research, animals enduring terrible pain, no matter what you say is the reason? Never mind devious ends to what we're about. And shouldn't we be caring about our environment and doing everything to just stop in our tracks and do an about-face and say, from A to Z, we're all going to have to do this across the board, and everybody's going to take a hit. Everybody's going to change together, and we're going to save our earth, and we're going to make for our life a more optimistic and fruitful and true and natural way of existence. I thank you very much for being here. I look forward to having you tune in again. And I'm going to say good night to you for now, and I'll ask Keith Williams in the control room to take it away with a video for you. Thank you, and good evening.